But right now, I have in the studio the former U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Kentucky, which includes Louisville and of course, the west part of the state. He is more recently a candidate for the Republican nomination for Attorney General. Welcome to the program, Russell Coleman.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Russell, you and I are not just colleagues, but we're good friends, and we disagree on any number of issues. But one thing I can assure your listeners that this is a man who is very decent, of great integrity, and someone who is in public service for all the right reasons. And so with all that, when you told me you were considering running this office, my first reaction was, hey, this is certainly something you're suited for, but do you really want to get involved in the muck of politics, which all those adjectives I just gave of you are the opposite when it comes to most of what we think of politics. So why did you decide to pull the trigger and run for this office, knowing, having been on the inside working for Mitch McConnell, how difficult politics is these days?
Well, you say the muck of politics. It's essentially an 18-month job interview for me to get back into law enforcement. I went to law school as a young man to become an FBI agent. That's why since I was a young man, wanted to get in the fight, wanted to protect families. And while that might sound like some throwaway line from a podium, I had the opportunity to serve for a number of years as an FBI special agent. I had an opportunity to serve as a state prosecutor. I know some of the finest people in this Commonwealth carry a badge and a gun. But I'm also a dad, and I have young kids, and I am frightened for their future. Not only what shows up on their screen, but the risk from the drug epidemic, the no margin of error with some of these substances that are dumping into our Commonwealth. I want to continue what I was asked to do by President Trump in serving as the United States Attorney, and that is get in the fight to protect Kentucky families.
So you're speaking about your career path. I have had the pleasure just a few minutes ago of introducing you to my 13-year-old nephew, Elijah Howard. Elijah was born in Lexington, grew up here, but now lives in Toronto, and he wants to be in law enforcement. And some of us were proud of him and that he would want to do something, but also a little scared. This is a tough time to be a police officer, particularly given all the violence, but also a lot of hostility for the police officer. What would you advise someone like Elijah who is interested in this kind of career?
2 weeks ago, I stood in a holler in a valley in Floyd County, Kentucky, right outside Prestonsburg, as we buried the first of 3 law enforcement officers that died in the line of duty in southeastern Kentucky within minutes of each other. I've been, as U.S. Attorney, as an FBI special agent, as a prosecutor, I've attended a number of line of duty services for lost law enforcement officers. I was in Murray 6 weeks ago, the loss of Jody Cash in Callaway County, the other end of the Commonwealth. And you see the worst in humanity as we're losing law enforcement officers at an advanced clip. It is a dangerous time to carry a badge and a gun. But, Jonathan, at the same time, whether in Floyd County or Callaway County, whether it was in Louisville with Dee Dee Mangadote, who we lost a couple of years ago, with Officer Rodman, you also see the finest in humanity. You see courage. You see men and women that raise their hand, like your 13-year-old nephew that I had a chance to chat with. You see that fire in his belly. He wants to protect. That's fundamentally what you do in law enforcement. There are a lot of tools, there are a lot of acronyms, but at the end of the day, the role is to protect. You want to protect families. And so it is an incredible time to get involved in law enforcement because the threats loom so large, whether it's the dangerous drugs that are pouring into our Commonwealth from our urban areas to our most rural, whether it's the violence we're seeing in cities like Louisville, and yes, cities like Lexington are seeing it. Even in rural areas, we're seeing an increase in violent crime across the Commonwealth. Yes, the challenges are great, but the threats are significant. And so I was excited to talk to him about what I think is one of the finest callings and professions. Now, can we do a better job in law enforcement? Can we constantly improve our training? Can we constantly improve relationships with marginalized communities, neighborhoods in Louisville, for instance, west of 9th Street, neighborhoods in Lexington that have had tough relationships with law enforcement? We can always improve. We can always do a better job. But I can't tell you how excited I am to potentially again serve with the men and women of Kentucky law enforcement as our next Attorney General.
We are going to break for some ads, and then we're going to talk about an issue you brought up, the rising scourge of drugs and how you can address them in the Commonwealth. But first, let's pay a few bills. Welcome back to Cruiser and Crew. This is Jonathan Miller, guest hosting for Cruiser, and I've got on the program Russell Coleman, who is the candidate for Attorney General on the Republican side of the aisle. We talked about his background and his love of law enforcement. And let's talk about probably the biggest challenge for law enforcement these days, and that's the drug scourge. You know, it seems like it's been a game of whack-a-mole. We had meth, and then we're able to crack down on that, and opioid abuse, and able to have guidelines, and then heroin came up, and now fentanyl, and now we have meth again. What can an attorney general really do about the drug problem that hasn't been done but can help save lives?
I apologize to your audience driving home. It's a beautiful Friday in the Bluegrass to be talking about a dark topic, but we would be hard-pressed to find anyone standing in your studio, anyone listening to you in their car, anyone sitting in an office who hasn't been impacted by the drug epidemic. It's not that neighborhood anymore. It's not that county, or it's not over there at that end of the state. It's everyone, Jonathan. We know that. It's good kids. It's good families. And so your question goes to, what can an AG do? What can an Attorney General do to have an impact? What hasn't been tried? It certainly does feel like whack-a-mole. It feels like, I've oftentimes analogized to narcotics enforcement like being in a boat and you're constantly bailing out as the water comes over the side. Well, we have to keep bailing or the boat sinks. I mean, we have to keep fighting for our families. And what can an AG do? Our biggest challenge in law enforcement, so oftentimes, it's not resources, although we could always use more. It's not statutory authority. A lot of times it's what it says on our badge. It's what it says on our badge. What do I mean by that? We don't work well together always. The state work well with the county sheriff necessarily work well with the city department. Who knows what the feds do in their alphabet soup? That law enforcement traditionally can always improve on how it coordinates, how we collaborate. I think one of the superpowers, Jonathan, of the Attorney General's office is what I'll call the power of the table. It's the power of that long table in the conference room of the AG's office, the ability to convene, to bring agencies together, to force collaboration, or encourage, rather, collaboration amongst agencies, to prioritize this issue from the podium, but to bring agencies together. But I'll tell you, as long as we have a permeable southwest border, as long as we have the poison that's pouring over our southwest border, and the president that I work for, President Trump, spent a lot of time talking about the border. He spent a lot of time talking about people and immigration. I wish he would have spent more time, frankly, talking about the poison, the stuff that comes over our southwest border. Because, Jonathan, every bit of the poison that's going into the arms of kids and noses in Fayette County, every bit of the poison. You had 161 fatal drug overdoses in Fayette County last year. 161. We had over 2,000 in this Commonwealth last year. That's a lot of empty chairs at kitchen tables, a lot of empty seats in church sitting next to you. There would be. We've been decimated. We had a 49% increase in drug overdoses between 20 and 21. Every bit of that comes from over the southwest border. Every bit of that comes from the Mexican drug cartels. And that's not a prosecutor standing at the podium, beating the podium. That's not hyperbolic language. That's the reality. Whether it's a rural sheriff or our most urban police department, ask law enforcement where this poison is coming from, and we don't produce it anymore. We don't have meth labs anymore in this Commonwealth because we get a higher quality, lower cost product from Mexico. So until we have a more secure border, until the United States government does a better job of securing our border, we will continue to be in that boat, just continuing to try to bail. We can't stop. Our families are worth it. We have to do a better job from the AG's perspective, collaborating and bringing these agencies together and talking about the threat with a sense of urgency. I don't get that sense of urgency from many in Frankfurt, given the numbers, given the fact that we had a 15% increase year over year from 20 to 21. That's after a 49% increase We are bleeding out, and we are losing our families to the drug epidemic. Now, the AG also needs to spend more time engaging. I hope to spend more time when the Attorney General, if privileged to do so, working on the prevention and treatment ends of this too. It is a three-legged stool. Certainly, law enforcement is a critical piece, but we have to also plus size our prevention efforts. When one of our kids can go to a party and take a pill, a single pill, and that can be pressed fentanyl, and we can lose the life of that child, a single pill. There's no margin of error. We have to do a better job on the prevention front as well.
So speaking of the issue that I know really drives you and drives me as well, that doesn't get talked as much than we talk about guns or we talk about drugs, but it's mental illness, and so much of the appetite for drugs comes from people who have mental illness. So many of these mass murderers are mentally ill. Do you see a role for the Attorney General to try to address these issues, whether through legislation or through some actions you can take?
I'm so grateful that you asked that question, Jonathan. The other superpower, that there's the convening authority of the Attorney General's, that table, the ability to bring agencies together. Table is both a metaphor and the reality of the job. But there's also the podium. The AG has an ability to draw attention to the most exigent, challenging issues we face from that podium. And I would argue that the most significant challenge following that of violent crime and the drug epidemic is mental health. That we've seen it become more patent, those of us who are parents, over the last couple of years. But mental health, whether it's violence, whether it's addiction, whether it's domestic violence, mental health plays such a role, such a foundational role in so many of the challenges that we have in our Commonwealth. And it's one of the reasons I'm running for Attorney General. And the AG is not the chief mental health officer of this Commonwealth. We know that. But the ability from that podium to collaborate with whomever is serving as governor, to collaborate with the legislature, to collaborate with our cabinet and Health and Family Services, to drive reform in the mental health space. And I come at this issue as a prosecutor, as a former law enforcement officer, but also as a parent. I've seen over the last few years the deficits we have in Kentucky when we're seeking to address pediatric mental health. And I will tell you, we have significant deficits in this Commonwealth. When parents have to seek treatment outside of the state, go to places like Utah that have incentivized a better treatment environment, incentivized practitioners. I don't have the answers sitting here in this studio, but I can tell you I know that the problem is exigent. We are on fire, and I know we have to, the AG, through that podium, has to drive solutions in collaboration and talk about this threat of mental health, particularly amongst our kids.
So my last question, we got to get into a little politics. You raised a boatload of money, a historic amount of money during your first quarter. You've been getting endorsements all across the state. You've been working hard. That I've even heard Mitch McConnell compare your work ethic to Mitch McConnell's work ethic, which is pretty much something. But you do have a flaw, and that is you pal around with Democrats. There's a particular former state treasurer that you claim to be a friend. You work across the aisle with.
I'm slowly scooting out of the studio as you say that.
With Democrats. But how are you going to overcome that? And do you think someone can elect someone? You think in this partisan spirit, you think a guy who treats office in a bipartisan, nonpartisan way can get elected these days?
Well, Jonathan, thank you for that question. I'm a conservative Republican. I stand very proudly with those that support life, who support the Second Amendment, who want to focus on backing the blue. I want to continue what President Trump asked me to do, and that is make Kentucky safe again. That doesn't mean that I won't be civil to those who disagree with me. That doesn't mean, and I think we have to do a better job, those of us who support life, those of us who feel strongly about the Second Amendment, who back the blue, we have to do a better job engaging with those that differ with us, who take a different view. We have to be respectful. We, particularly on the life issue, have to reach out to those. It's a very sensitive, very visceral issue. I want to be respectful to those who take a different view. It doesn't make me any less a conservative Republican that I will treat those who differ from me with civility. I will tell you, public safety, at its core, it's not an RRD issue. That homicide victim, 188 in Louisville last year, significant increases here in Lexington. There's no R or D behind their name in parentheses. That overdose victim, no one cares whether they're an R or D. They just want to stop the tragedy and the violence we're seeing in this Commonwealth, and I want to be in that fight.
Russell Coleman, candidate for Attorney General, thank you for joining us.
I'm grateful. Thank you.
We'll be back soon.